What's up, everybody, and welcome into the Philip Jordan podcast. I am Philip Jordan, in-studio host and producer, listening with football on 96.9, The Legend, and Auburn Rider, the last word on college football. Got a fun show planned for you guys this week. We're looking back at Week 7 in the SEC. We will be talking about Alabama's almost upset loss to South Carolina. That would have been 2 weeks in a row. What is wrong with the Crimson Tide? We will talk about that on the show today. LSU, Ole Miss, takeaways there. Tennessee, Florida, another overtime matchup. How Vanderbilt continued their momentum, their solid play after the Alabama win. We'll do that and much, much more with Chris Lee from the Southeastern 16. You can check out the Philip Jordan podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review, and I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you leave just 4 stars, you're just a straight-up hater. You can also check out the show over at Wiregrass Daily News. You can watch the show over at the Philip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. You can also email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. Everybody joining me on the show today, we're going to review a very interesting and fun week in the SEC. Week 7 was a lot of fun. And joining me is Chris Lee. You check him out at the Southeastern 16, also vandysports.com. And Chris, appreciate you coming on. The SEC is kind of wild right now.
I don't think wild even does it justice, but I'll tell you what, it's fun. It's not always pretty, but the competitive week in, week out, I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, it's, and we kind of came into the season, we thought, okay, Texas, and they've kind of been as advertised so far, whoever's playing quarterback. Look, we got questions with Georgia coming out of their game. Alabama, obviously, we're going to get in them in a few minutes. Ole Miss now with 2 losses. We thought they were that team. So it's kind of like a lot of the things we thought going to season pretty much been thrown out the window.
Yeah, hey, I think this sums it up, and this is painful for the people in your neck of the woods to hear. Well, maybe not for some of them, but look, if you go into the season, Vanderbilt's probably most people's pick is the worst team in the league. And Alabama wouldn't be everybody's pick as the best team in the league, but it would have been somebody's pick as the best team in the league. And I think a defensible one. We're 2 weeks out of Vanderbilt beating Alabama. I mean, in our lifetime, is the team that was supposed to be the worst ever beaten the team that was maybe supposed to be the best? I've never seen an outcome like that as long as I remember watching SEC football. Now, maybe it's happened and I'm just forgetting, but here's my point. Like week in, week out, you've seen Vanderbilt win 3 times as a double-digit underdog. You saw Arkansas upset Tennessee. You came that close to seeing South Carolina pull a stunner in Tuscaloosa. You saw Georgia with the final score against Mississippi State that was closer than anybody would have expected. It's just that kind of year in the league, and I think people need to get used to it because I think with the portal and with NIL and all the unlimited transfers, basically, I don't think this is going away.
You talked about, I think, most people probably would have had Vanderbilt, the worst team going into the season. I guess right now that team's got it. Would you say it was Mississippi State? I mean,
it's Mississippi State, but they're not awful. I mean, there's been times they looked awful, like Toledo, and I think that game against Georgia was a little misleadingly close. I think total offense was 600 and change to 3 something and change, although it was pushing 400. And I know they got a late touchdown, but Georgia got one with 6 minutes left too. I mean, I think State's played a few games that maybe statistically weren't as close as the final score showed, but it also shows you something about Jeff Levy. They don't have a defense, and now they're playing with a true freshman quarterback, which is tough. And I think them being competitive and not getting beat by 50 points against Texas and Georgia, which is usually what happens in this league in those situations, that says something about the state of the league. That probably also says something about the job that Jeff Levy has done there.
Yeah, that's the thing I was kind of looking at. Just when you look at the bottom of the conference, I know a lot of times SEC people, fans, people cover say top to bottom, but there were years where the bottom was really bad. Right now, like if you were to overlook one of those teams toward the bottom of the league, I mean, and the other team would stay here, Auburn. I mean, they're 2-4, but turnovers is big thing. I mean, that team is really good at just turning the ball over a lot. It's just if you think you're just going to walk in to these games now with even the teams at the bottom. They're going to give you a game. We saw that Saturday with South Carolina, Alabama.
Well, we also saw it with Tennessee and Florida. I mean, Florida was a fourth down conversion somewhere to not having to go to overtime and win that game without Graham Mertz, by the way, playing a lot of it because of a now what we know is a torn ACL. So I think that's just another point in the bigger point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off with Alabama, South Carolina. So I said, okay, I watched this game at 11. You would think going into this game, South Carolina's coming off a blowout loss to Ole Miss, Alabama coming off the loss to Vanderbilt. You just figure, okay, Alabama's at home. They're going to look to show everybody why they're one of the best teams, why they beat Georgia the week prior. And, this thing started off looking that way, 14-0.
Yeah.
But, Chris, I don't know. I'll get your thoughts when you watch Alabama play. And I hate to constantly bring this up, but you can tell that Nick Saban's not on the sidelines anymore. And to me, and I also heard Greg McElroy said this, their situational awareness isn't good. They don't seem disciplined. Yeah. And then Jalen Milroe, sometimes, he looks great running the offense, Heisman Trophy candidate. But other times you see the intentional grounding, the interception right before halftime that led into South Carolina getting some points and getting the lead. Just this team at times, they look great, but other times they just look undisciplined to me.
Well, you set it up well for where I was going to go. Because, just the Malachi Moore, the last 2 minutes of that Vandy game, that alone is kind of Exhibit A. The penalties have been a lot at times. Milroe's made some huge turnovers. Now, look, I think sometimes in SEC country, we get in this habit of saying, boy, so-and-so's really down or they looked awful. I think the competitive state of things right now, it is like the NFL in a lot of ways, where just about anybody can beat anybody week to week. And I think that accounts for some things that the teams that are at the top don't like to give credit for, because Georgia and Alabama are just used to steamrolling people and having their way. It's not that league anymore. But at the same time, I also watch the games and I see the things that you're talking about. And I see an Alabama team that's near the league lead in penalties. And I do think there are some issues there.
But at the same time, we look at what Alabama did wrong, and look, they came out with a win 27-25. But also, when you look at it, South Carolina, just the performance, one of their defensive front, 9 tackle for losses, 4 sacks. Kyle Kennard, good luck anybody blocking that guy anywhere one-on-one. He had 2 sacks and 3 TFL. So, and that was another thing. That South Carolina defense that they've been showing it this year so far, they cause some of them problems. What have you been seeing out of that group?
Well, look, that's not a team that gets a lot of run in this league, and you don't hear their guys get talked about a lot, but they've got, as you talked about, Kyle Kennard. They've got Dylan Stewart, who's a very gifted pass rushing freshman. They got Debo Williams at linebacker, who's a very good player. They've got all kinds of guys in the secondary who made plays. They go Donald Fortune and Fikari Swain had big plays in that game. Nick Emanwuri, their safety, is one of the better safeties in the league. I think that part of the thing is that they ran up against the defense with some dudes that made some plays. And Tonka Hemingway, another one right in the middle, one of your better defensive linemen in the league. I think let's give credit where it's due, and you're facing some dudes on that team.
Yeah, and their quarterback, Lenore Sellers, he made plays in this game. When he wasn't being sacked, and when he had a chance to throw the ball, he made plays. And Sanders was good, in the game too. So it's one of those things too. We kind of look at the Alabama defense too. It's kind of like ever since that second half against Georgia, this defense has kind of looked exposed as well. I think it kind of ties back into what was a question coming into the season, because when Nick Saban retired last year, after last season, defensive backs hit the portal. I think we're kind of seeing that kind of weakness in their secondary right now.
Yeah, and back to Carolina. Well, first of all, yes. It doesn't, like, usually Alabama has got like a surefire first-round corner that you've seen play before, safety, and like they're deep defensive back you at times. And I looked at their whole defense. I said, look, I'm not seeing a Will Anderson. I'm not seeing a if you want to go way back, a Derek Thomas. I'm not seeing a Minka Fitzpatrick or any number of phenomenal defensive backs they've had. It was a team that had 4 and 5 stars, but they're not the names So I think that's part of it. But on the Carolina end, like here's another thing that's kind of coming into play. Experience at quarterback's kind of a big deal in this league. And you
Mhm.
saw with Sanders, he's big and he's athletic, and there's probably nobody in the league that you're going to face that's that big that runs that fast. And that's a headache for a defense and a coordinator. But at the same time, they also had that chance at the end, and he just missed an open guy. That goes with experience, and I think you're seeing a few teams in this league with guys that hadn't played a lot of quarterback in this league. Tennessee's having difficulties at times. Brock Vanderhoof of Kentucky's been kind of uneven. Guys getting their first shot at quarterback that comes with some growing pains, and I think that was part of what you saw with Carolina in that game too.
Yeah. So, and then, of course, if you're ever going against a team with a coach by the name of Beamer, watch out on special teams because the
Yeah.
onside kick. And I thought, man, I ain't going to lie, Chris. I thought, oh, are they going to do it? Are they going to pull off the upset? Then the worst thing that could happen was an offensive lineman catching the tip pass. And that probably killed about 15 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they've had their issues at field goal kicker, but it'd been kind of at least a little. We'll see if they could have got with a close down there. But Alabama does come away with the win. But Tennessee coming up, that's they got a lot of questions to answer. I mean, Tennessee's got some stuff too, so I know we're going to talk about them. But the other game, the night game, LSU and Ole Miss. Who was you favoring going into that one? Were you kind of like Ole Miss, or do you think LSU at home should have been the winner here?
I had Ole Miss, and my justification was I think they're both pretty good offenses. But I thought that with losing Perkins, and I didn't really trust their defense with Perkins anyway. I just thought that was going to be the death knell. But hey, they've got Blake Baker, who makes defenses better. They're starting to figure some stuff out. I would be lying if I told you I can figure out exactly what it is that they're doing, but they're near the top of the leaders in sacks in this league. So they're getting a little bit of a pass rush. It's not one of the more talented teams they've had, but you look at what Blake Baker did at Missouri. They were awful 3 or 4 years ago. He takes over and within 2 years had them into one of the best units in the league, if not the country. I think he's working some magic down there, and I think that's what I didn't count on. I didn't know if that would have some staying power. Ole Miss has run into some issues facing some of the better offenses as that offensive line is getting exposed a little bit. No, by the way, the thing that LSU does is it really protects the passer, giving up 2 sacks all year against an Ole Miss defense that has lived off the sack. And I think those were a couple things that ended up being a difference.
Yeah, they got after Jackson Dart 6 times. I mean, that's just the sack number. I mean, they were constantly putting pressure on him. I think the back end of their defense had issues. I mean, there's a lot of times we saw Ole Miss wide receivers just absolutely wide open, but it doesn't matter if they're wide open. If your quarterback is getting hit the way he is. And I guess with the LSU offense, they don't have anything 10 yards. It's all deep shots down the field because that seemed everything that Garrett Nussmeier was completing on Saturday night was something deep down the field.
Yeah, and I think he started to be maybe a potentially underrated part of the player of the year conversation. That they lost a lot of weapons in that receiving core. He's found some with Lacey and Anderson and Mason Taylor, who's one of the best tight ends in the country. They've got a little bit of a running game. It flashes at times. They've got some stuff that's starting to work for them.
Yeah, you got Mason Taylor at tight end. Kyron Lacey. I mean, he got hurt during the game too, and then he came back. And,
yeah.
So they have a lot of interesting matches there with that team, and of course, maybe Garrett Nussmeier needs to run a little bit more. If anybody watched the broadcast knows that Greg McElroy was beating that to death in the game, that maybe Garrett Nussmeier needs to try to run it instead of just trying to chuck it deep sometimes.
Yeah, that's not his thing though, and I mean, if it's broken, don't fix it. I guess, right?
Yeah, they went complete opposite from where they were at quarterback last year to this year. Jaden Daniels had no issues doing that. With Ole Miss too, I mentioned on the top coming in, this was a team a lot of people thought was a playoff team, but I know a lot of people looked at that schedule and they had certain matchups. This was one of the big ones that was circled. I don't think a lot of people had them losing to Kentucky. Obviously, they still got Georgia down the road. When you look at this team now with 2 losses, you got to look, okay, they got to win out for any shot at the playoffs. But, I mean, what do you see? Is there issues with this team or what has caused some of this? And now we look at a team that could come out to be a disappointment.
Well, I see an offensive line that that on paper to me was their weakest link. Now they had a ton of experience there, and I thought that might make up for it. I think that's become an issue. I think sometimes these teams we crown them when they're just beating nobodies week after week after week, and they didn't play anybody until Kentucky. And look, I no, Grant, I think Ole Miss is a better team than the record. Let me be clear. But two things can be true at once. I think their offensive line, they're having some issues there. It's not a championship caliber offensive line at the level at which it's playing. And I didn't get what Lane Kiffin was doing late in regulation. Like, I didn't understand why they didn't make a more aggressive attempt to get into field goal range. Because I was just thinking at the time, and we've got the receipts. We were doing our live stream late in that game, and I said, hey, look, do you really want to go to overtime where you're running into an end zone with the short field and it's, 90-something thousand screaming maniacs or whatever the number is, and it's going to be harder to hear in that spot? I thought they should have been more aggressive, tried to get a long field goal. And so I think to me those were the two things that stood out.
Yeah, kind of surprising. And, that's kind of one of the things, too, when you are on the road in this kind of game, you kind of want to be more the aggressor to a certain extent. And especially with the way they were able to throw the ball. I mean, I know Jackson Dart, like I said, got sacked 6 times, but still, I mean, their receivers were getting wide open pretty easily against LSU. So you figured it had to be some plays there. So I'm with you. I was very shocked. Lane Kiffin really went conservative there at the end because I don't think like you said, you don't want to go in overtime against LSU at night at home. And we saw it happen in that one. Another overtime game, Tennessee and Florida. And I went out to dinner with some people. Florida was up 10-0, and then Graham Mertz get hurt. And that seems like the point in this game where it turned a little bit when he got hurt. Yeah. And also, hey, Chris, I mean, 2 weeks in a row, Tennessee down 3-0 at halftime. I mean, you kind of what you just mentioned, like Ole Miss, they were playing nobodies and they were looking great offensively. Seems like that with Tennessee. And I know Nico's a freshman. I know that he's not experienced. But, we got told how good he could be. We haven't really seen that on display yet with him.
Yeah, and you're seeing some overlapping parallels here. Young quarterback, and he's probably the least experienced of all the starting quarterbacks in the league if you go all the way back to high school and before that. That's number one. Offensive line troubles, that's number two. They're having trouble protecting the passer at times. And teams have just decided it's sometimes to just drop a lot of guys in coverage and make him make a decision. And they're not getting a lot of separation from their receiving core. And eventually, if you let a guy stand there back long enough, you can get to him with 3 or 4 guys. So I think those are a couple of the problems that they're having. Credit Florida. Florida's playing better. But Billy Napier, boy, if they'd just taken a field goal in a couple of spots, you probably don't even get to overtime. 0-2 fourth downs. Tennessee was 2-2. They're probably ended up being the key stat of the game. But I think if you're Florida, and I say going to the game, I think this is a game where you want to play Graham Mertz more because he's less turnover prone and he's very accurate with the ball. Keep possession. You don't turn it over. I thought that was the key. And I thought when they lost Mertz, they lost a lot of that.
So I'm going to put a head coach hat on you, Chris. Do you go for 2?
Oh, boy.
On that last touchdown by Florida instead of kicking an extra point? You're on the road. You're the underdog. You're playing your backup quarterback. Do you think maybe Napier should have went for 2 in that situation, just avoid overtime altogether?
Well, he's in a spot where if something goes wrong and it's unconventional, that fan base is going to yell at him anyway. But it's also back to the thing of, okay, when you go to overtime, you're going a bunch of plays into an end zone. So the noise is magnified. You're doing it for one play, but I might rather do it for one play than I am, how many of it takes to get through, how many of our overtimes are ahead. When you got a guy like DJ Lagway too, who can run it, I think I'm a little more inclined to go for it there. Most coaches don't. If it goes badly and they lose, he's probably getting criticized even more today. And coaches tend to make moves a lot of times based on what's going to get me yelled at the least.
Yeah, well, we look at with Tennessee. Now they go in, they host Alabama, which apparently this ties into Vanderbilt too. When a team from Tennessee beats Alabama at home, I guess the protocol is to tear down your goalpost and throw it into a river. I think this. I look at this game and I would be shocked whoever wins Alabama, Tennessee. Both teams are not coming off great weeks. They won, which is important, survive, get a win. But then you also look at where those two teams are at. Just, before we
Yeah.
jump into Vanderbilt, Kentucky, real quick, just what are your thoughts on the Alabama Tennessee matchup for Saturday?
Well, I think whichever team wins, throw out whatever's happened before. You were sky high leaving that game because you feel like you got a better than average shot to make the playoff. Whatever team loses, and I don't care if you play an A game and lose by a field goal in the last play game, and it's going to be the end of the world because
Mm-hmm.
both teams have had expectations. I think there's a lot on the line. My concern for Alabama sometimes is it almost scores too quickly, and it keeps its defense on the field a lot. Tennessee runs the ball a lot. I go back to playing at somebody else's place. Remember what happened last time Alabama was there?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of noise, a lot of false starts, those kind of things. And Tennessee's third down defense is great too. I think there's some things that they're staring Alabama in the face as potential issues. But I think if you're Tennessee, Nico hadn't been very good in the passing game. Billy Napier just came out and flat out said it. We want him to throw the ball. And Alabama's pass defense has not been great at times, but I think if you get them behind the chains, it's a different game.
Yeah, and you talk about with Alabama, this is a big game for them because look, later down the road, you got to go to Baton Rouge. And I'm just going to guess that's going to be in prime time. So we know Brian Kelly's record there and what happened last time they went to Baton Rouge. Didn't go well for them. So it's a big road test coming up for Alabama. Vanderbilt beating Kentucky 20-13. We were talking about this a little bit off there before we hit record. That I was really impressed just from the simple fact this would have been an easy game for Vanderbilt have a letdown. Like you're still living off the Alabama game. You're still seeing Diego Pavia on all the talk shows throughout the week. But then they go in. Look, was it pretty? No, but they won. They're 4-2 on the road, 20-13. Just what was your big takeaways from Vanderbilt with this win? Kind of continuing after the Alabama win.
Well, the motivational thing was something that people talked about a lot. And people said, well, how are they going to handle this? It's the biggest win in program history. They're the center of the sports universe for a weekend probably. And they're getting interview requests way through the week. That never happens for them. They don't get those locally. So, but there was one thing in the back pocket. They've got the best win in college football years. They've also got one of the worst losses that a Power 5 team has had when they lost at Georgia State. So Clark Lee's got that in his back pocket if he needs to use it. I'm thinking, you would like to have that game back and not having lost it if you're Vandy. But that's also a thing, like once that's done, it's a tool. And I think he never said it and no one ever asked him, but it felt like that loss might have been a thing that they never had to bring up because you can tell when coaches say we didn't have a good week of practice or whatever. And that's what he said coming into the Georgia State game. He forewarned everybody that might be coming. And we saw what happened. I think when he said at his press conference Tuesday, our practices have been great. I think he said it later in the week. It kind of felt like motivation wasn't going to be an issue. And to me, I said all week, I'm not really worried about their state of mind as much as I'm worried about handling Kentucky's defense and getting enough points because they are tough up front. But that they got just enough points. I think all that talk of being hungover from win was, much ado about nothing. And you saw what happened in Lexington.
Yeah, it was a big deal when I'm a listener to the show. When I saw that Diego Pavia on Monday was on the Dan Patrick show, that was a big deal. And I'm going to toot my own horn for a second, Chris. I'm going to look back at that Alabama Vanderbilt game. One of my buddies of mine, if he's listened to, I'm sorry, man, bringing it up. You're probably going to unsubscribe to me if you subscribe to the podcast. I told him that Vanderbilt would score some points on Alabama in that game. And he was like, nah, ain't no way. And he called me at halftime. He said, man, I was a little bit wrong. This Diego Pavia is pretty good. Just what has this guy meant for this Vanderbilt program?
Oh, everything. They are he is the perfect guy for that program. I mean, underdog guy, did not have offers out of high school. And Philip, that offense, you go back to what they did against Alabama. They hadn't used a shovel pass all year. I think they threw 3 to Eli Stowers alone.
Mm-hmm.
they can do so many things off that offense, but I don't think it's the play. I mean, the play calling's great. I mean, their play calling is tremendous. I think that game that Tim Beck called against Alabama is one of the best called games I have ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: you've also got a guy who is almost more of a point guard than he is a quarterback, and it's like when you're facing one of these hot shot point guards, and like, okay, he's got a guy running fast break to his right, a guy running a fast break to his left, and all of a sudden he flips the ball behind his head to the trailer for a dunk that you weren't ready for. That's kind of what Diego Pavia does to teams. And it's not just that he does the thing that you're not expecting. It's that he does it in a split second. I mean, I keep waiting for the time that he fakes one of his teammates out with something that they're not expecting, a pitch, a lateral. Hasn't happened yet, though. And I think that's why they're so tough to defend. Not only is it a scheme that you don't ever see in the SEC, but it's the closest thing to a triple option offense you'll see without facing one. But it's not just the scheme; it's the guy running it is so good at it. And I think they're going to try to replicate this scheme going forward in future years. And I think that's a formula that gives them the best chance to win. I don't know if they can find another Diego Pavia, though. He's special.
Yeah, trust me, if there's one fan base in this conference that knew what Vanderbilt was probably getting, that was Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers. Yeah. Of course, Vanderbilt's going to come to Auburn early in November. Real quickly, before I let you go, just I know we kind of talked about Alabama and Tennessee. Just your quick thoughts on Texas and Georgia for Saturday.
Can't wait to see it. I feel like Georgia's defense has really slipped. I don't know what teams picked up on film in that Alabama game, but Mississippi State averaged 6.1 yards a play against Georgia. That's unheard of. I'm just worried that their defense may not be what they've had before. Yeah, you're missing 2 starting receivers now with the discipline issues. Now they got other guys who can play. Tate Ratledge has been out. It just feels like Texas, like when I'm power ranking every week, I feel like State's kind of an easy call at 16, though it's not bad. And Texas right now is an easy call at 1. Everything in between is pretty debatable. But now, having said that, Texas has not played the schedule that a lot of the rest of the league has seen. They played some good teams. Michigan's a good team, but Michigan didn't have much of an offense. So I'm a little wary because what have we seen when teams have not played somebody? Sometimes it looks like a different ball game, but this is a team that went to the playoff last year. It's got 2 outstanding quarterbacks. I feel like this team's built a little differently. It doesn't have an obvious weakness when I watch them. Maybe the running back room isn't quite what they wanted, but they got 3 guys over 200 yards who can all play a little bit. So I think Texas feels like the team with the fewest concerns at this point. But, I feel like we're kind of writing off Georgia, too. They might be due for something better. We'll see.
Yeah, it is the best offense that Texas we have seen so far this year. So, anyways, Chris, it's been a lot of fun. It was a fun weekend this past week 7. I know we're going into week 8. That's going to be a lot of fun in the SEC. But listener viewers want to follow you online. Where can they find you?
Yeah, it's been fun every week, even the weeks we don't think it's going to be at least once we got out of the garbage first 3 weekend games. It's been
Absolutely
something else. So go to YouTube, search Southeastern 16. You'll find us. We do baseball, football, basketball year round.
All right, sounds good, Chris. Again, appreciate the time, and I look forward we can do this again sometime down the road.
You bet. God bless you, and thanks for having me.
96.9 The Legend is your connection to classic country legends. But Digio Strategies has other options too. News Talk 103.9 is your source for America's top news and entertainment shows, like Rick and Bubba in the morning, Glenn Beck from 9 till 11 a.m., and Clay Travis and Buck Sexton middays from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. Sean Hannity, Lars Larson, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and others fill your day with the latest news and views from America's top conservative voices. America at Night and Coast to Coast AM keep you company and connected throughout the night. Plus, Fox News, the Alabama Radio Network, and Wiregrass Daily News keep you informed with national, international, state, and local news. And with more musical choices like All the Hits 106.7 KMX, Today's Country 95.5 WTVY, and Music 107.7, Digio Strategies gives you more choices and more variety. Listen on air, online, and on our apps. 96.9 The Legend is just the beginning.
High school football season, and that means the Dothan Wolves are back on 96.9 The Legend. Every Thursday night, check out the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show with Jerry Coleman and Ken Lambert as they sit down with Dothan Wolves head coach Jed Kennedy about the previous game and preview the upcoming opponent. If you missed the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show, you can check out the podcast at wiregrassdailynews.com or go to your favorite podcast catcher and just type in Dothan High School Football. And, of course, every Friday night, pregame starts at 6:45 and kickoff is at 7 for all the Dothan Wolves football action. All right, and thanks to Chris Lee for coming on the show today. Always enjoy talking with Chris. Check out the great job they do over at the Southeastern 16. Him, Blake Lovell, and also Chase Robinson over there, and many others when it comes to covering the Southeastern Conference. With a couple games we did not get in touch with there with Chris, which he mentioned a little bit, the Georgia-Mississippi State game. Of course, Mississippi State fought really well in this game. Georgia wins 41-31, and he talked about the defense of Georgia. Now, Michael Van Buren had 306 yards passing in the game, 3 touchdowns. They didn't really run the ball a lot, but they got behind. So when you look at the score, 41-31, you think, okay, Mississippi State hung in there. Really, it was Mississippi State made some plays early. Georgia distanced himself, and then Mississippi State got the game a little bit closer there toward the end because Georgia was up 34-17 about midway through the third quarter, and then Mississippi State put up some scores in that one. But again, we look at it. They struggled against Alabama, did Georgia defensively. Auburn made some plays, and we saw Mississippi State make some plays. We'll see what happens with Texas playing Georgia. I mean, Georgia is the best offense Texas has gone up against, but we'll see, can some of the things Alabama exploited with the Georgia defense, will that be taken in effect? We didn't really get into the Texas-Oklahoma game, which is kind of wild because first year, this is part of the SEC. This rivalry, one of the best rivalries in all of college football. Oklahoma just couldn't do anything offensively. There was never a point in a game where I really felt like Oklahoma's offense was going to threaten the Texas defense. Michael Hawkins Jr., 19-30, 148. No touchdowns, no interception. Average yards on the passing game is 4.9. They really couldn't get a running game, 89 yards. Obviously, the game really broke there right before halftime. It was 7-3. Texas looked like they going in for a score. Fumble, but Texas recovered, end zone goes up 14-3. Really changed things there. If Oklahoma could have picked up that fumble, at least gone into halftime just down 7-3, but instead, they were up or down big in this one, 21-3. So Oklahoma they're good defensively. They just do not have the players offensively right now with Michael Hawkins. I'm kind of surprised we never saw Jackson Arnold in the game, especially there in the second half when the offense was struggling. But we'll see how that impacts this team going forward, how Oklahoma can pick up some wins. I'll tell you this, with Texas, they're great. They played great. And we've seen them in two. The big profile games, obviously, were the Michigan game and then this one, but you're going against two offenses that are very limited. So when you look at Texas now going against Georgia, again, Georgia's the best offense they play. So we'll see how they react to the Georgia offense in that one. And then, look, Missouri took care of business. They beat UMass 45-3, bounced back from that blowout loss to Texas A&M. Brady Cook was 14-19 for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns. The run game for Missouri was great, 231 in the game. Marcus Carroll had 91 yards. Luther Burden had a rushing touchdown. He has 68 yards overall. So that's kind of like what they did there with Missouri in the run game. And Luther Burden had 5 catches for 59 yards. So bounce back, but they will be playing Auburn this week, 11 o'clock, ESPN on that one. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Phil Jordan Podcast. We'll be back on Thursday. I am scheduled to be joined by Saturday Down South, Adam Spencer, as we will look ahead to Week 8 in the SEC and look at all of these big matchups. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcasts available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. From Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. You can check the show out on YouTube, Philip Jordan Sports, and also Wiregrass Daily News. And if you want to, shoot me an email, sportstalkphilipjordan@gmail.com. Check out my written work over at Last Word on college football. Hope everybody has a great Tuesday. We'll be back on Thursday to preview Week 8 in the SEC. Till next time, bye-bye.